I think we have a responsibility as stewards of that environment to ask ourselves profound questions, and starting with, is it better to tear something down, or can we repurpose this, and does that have a greater value in doing that? And it's often more expensive to repurpose existing buildings than it is to, simply demolish it and build something shiny and new.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the future and our home planet. Today, we'll explore how architecture can help heal our relationship with nature and how the spaces we design and inhabit can become living systems that regenerate rather than deplete. My guest is Kevin Kennon, an internationally acclaimed architect with more than 40 years of experience driving innovation in sustainable and human-centered design. He's the founder and CEO of Beyond Zero DDC, where he pioneers zero-carbon luxury eco-resorts that unite cutting-edge technology, craftsmanship, and environmental responsibility. Kevin's portfolio spans some of the world's most ambitious projects, from the Rodin Museum in Seoul to Barclays North American headquarters, Macy's Herald Space restoration, and award-winning Bloomingdale stores. His work has been honored with over 40 international design awards and is part of the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection. As founder of the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, Kevin also helps young architects reimagine how design can serve humanity. With that, let's welcome him to the show. Hello, Kevin. How are you today?
Thank you. It was a lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, Corinna.
Now, you've spent your career at the intersection of innovation, sustainability, and human experience. What first inspired this belief that architecture could be a force for environmental and social good?
Well, the simple answer is my father was an architect. And
mine too.
and unfortunately, I don't think my kids are going to be an architect. I should wait because they haven't graduated from college yet, so you never know. But but he was an incredible guy, and he was very himself. He was very inspired by the relationship between architecture and nature, way beyond what anybody was thinking today. This was in the early 70s. It's from the 60s to 70s. He had apprenticed with an architect called Eero Saarinen, and he was with Eero for many years. And he ultimately became dean at the Rice School of Architecture in Houston, as well as the president of a company called CRS, which was at the time was the largest company in the world, architecture company. And but he was very driven by, I would say, the effect of the environment on our buildings and our humanity, and he was able to sort of continue that kind of focus throughout his career, and in many respects was a leader that, if we look back on some of his work today, I think it's pretty incredible. For example, he was working with Jimmy Carter at developing something called the Solar Energy Research Institute, which would have been an amazing project if it hadn't been killed by Reagan as soon as he got in the office. But at the time, that would have put U.S. light years ahead of any other country in terms of development of solar energy, and which now I think we're somewhat lagging behind as a result of some of our current focus. And even though the technology itself has gotten exponentially better and cheaper, and it's incredible to see what's happening in other parts of the world, less developed parts of the world, where they're adopting alternative energy, in particular solar, as a means of generating their own power and becoming less reliant on countries like the U.S. for its source of energy.
Well, it's nice to hear the history behind that story. Now, the name of your company, Beyond Zero, suggests you're going further than carbon neutrality. And I think there's a lot of skepticism around this. Can you talk about why you chose this name and how you see architecture being able to potentially even drive towards that world where we're able to build?
Yeah, well, I think I want to be clear. I think it's a target, something to aim for. And I think that part of our problem has been, we've adopted a lot of very, a kind of a general greenwashing terminology. And it hasn't really served our efforts very well. And so, for example, the sort of adoption of net zero, the problem with net zero is that it includes things like carbon offsets, where you can be a coal-producing heavy polluter in West Virginia, and just because you bought certain carbon credits in a bank, and they would plant trees in Wyoming or something, it doesn't necessarily benefit the community, which is on the receiving end of all of that greenhouse emissions coming from your coal-producing plant. So that's an example of where I think we're kind of falling short. But the flip side of this whole thing is that we can't put the brakes on the technology that we're continually investing and developing all over the world, including the U.S., fortunately. And I see that as something that will drive the economy towards greater and greater needs for all kinds of energy investment, but most particularly alternative energy.
Now, I wonder if there are particular building materials that you're really fond of, given their ability to cost less in the environment, or that you find are opening your eyes into new ways that you can even design buildings today.
Well, so my company, we're focused on really developing what we call luxury resorts and hotels, but in wilderness areas, but really on the edge of this. It's just because that's part of my whole upbringing growing up in Southern California, and I spent a lot of time outdoors exploring nature in a way that you don't, now that I live in New York City, you don't do as much. But the issues that you're facing with are kind of starting to combine, where we're not just talking about promoting alternative energy, but we're also talking about resiliency, how we can build more effectively in spite of the fact that our planet is changing. Climate is becoming more and more of a factor, and we have to take into account things like wildfires and floods and landslides and all this sort of stuff that I grew up with, living right on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, and being, having to deal with all of those types of conditions, which are now becoming more prevalent in places that we never even thought, would be. So I think that's here to stay. I don't see that changing anytime in the future. So we have to sort of balance all of these objectives to make it possible, so that not only can we create a better planet and a better environment, but we also can sustain, our ability to live in the current environment that we have.
Now, I understand that architecture truly mirrors society's values. how much we invest in projects, how ornate they are. And as climate pressures mount, what do you see as being the biggest paradigm shift to make design regenerative rather than simply less harmful?
Well, the obvious answer to that is that there's a lot of new materials that we're investing in and developing. A lot of them are still kind of in the lab, but that continues to be something that is of great interest to architects because we tend to be the kind of point of the spear, at least in my career, as a design architect, I'm the point of the spear at advocating for new materials and helping enlighten, not just amongst ourselves, but the clients that we serve, that there are, other ways to build, and they may be appropriate for the particular project that we're working on. So, but that's one of it. I think the flip side is, we're having to look at how we regulate buildings. I think in a different way. It has become a bit of an impediment, and that's something I am worried about. Just because we have needs as a society, we certainly have housing needs above anything else, and we have the means to solve these problems. We just have to figure out a more efficient way of achieving design objectives. And, I think we're on the cusp of being able to do that.
How do you see the profession overall evolving and changing in the next 20 years? Is there anything in particular right now that is exciting you?
Well, I think we're all excited by AI. I'm continued to be amazed by what's happening in technology. I'm a little concerned about the next generation growing up in an environment which is so easy to sort of produce whatever is in your head or whatever you can prompt without having the experience to understand what that means. Anybody can create an image of something, but to create an image of something that's meaningful in terms of architecture is a whole nother enterprise. I mean, you have to take into the fact that architecture is fundamentally reality, and reality has its own, rules. Things like gravity, for example, which are intractable, and so you have to look at both, the vision of the future, but also the practical steps of how you achieve that vision.
I think I could respond to the AI question in this context because I don't know. I get the sense that overall there's too many people getting fearful that it's going to take jobs away. But I think of it as something that can actually help us be more productive in our creativity. And so much of the time that we spend in learning is often focused on understanding the rudimentary. Like we still have to take basic math and then go into algebra and take calculus and things like that. If we want to go into the hard sciences, we need to understand how these things come together. And as an engineer or an architect, these things are always going to be true as well. So I kind of look at it as the goal of our education needs to be to ensure that we understand these foundationally, and then to begin to look at AI and technology as tools to help us build something better, or to even just workshop design ideas to see if they're flawed in some way that we didn't anticipate without having to test it on a 50-story skyscraper. And these are things that I think can be actually very healthy and good. We can also look to where we can save on materials. I think there's some really great and creative things coming out of the cement space, like even building walkways that can also serve as drainage because they're just designed a little bit differently and just as stable as the former sidewalks that we knew, or integrating some sort of technology so that it can actually operate as an energy source to aid in things like helping air flow through, warm, cool, so that heat pumps can be more effective in buildings. I mean, that's kind of how I see this shifting and growing with time. And perhaps that's also because my dad's an architect and I've been around this my whole life in one way or another and done this whole projects myself where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to create a topographical
Yeah.
map building that we live in. And it was pretty darn accurate, even though we never had the blueprints, you
Yeah,
know?
that's great.
So I I think these are exercises that we can all push our brains through and that AI can help us with. The thing that I want to caution people at is really that because you know how to use AI doesn't mean that you can become expert in something without doing the work. And I think that's what you're getting at. Like a layperson can't suddenly be the designer of the Sistine Chapel. That's not going to work.
Well, I mean, it's a nuanced position that I think I take on this because on the one hand, as an architect and an educator, I'm a huge advocate for anything that gets people excited about what we do. So
Mhm.
if your entry, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm completely agnostic as to what it is that gets you interested in architecture, for example, or the
Mhm.
city, that you live in. Something involving a park. Um, uh, whatever that spark is that got you there, and if it's because you discovered this playing around with different AI programs, that's fine. That's to me is okay. I think where it gets problematic, and what I think is kind of interesting based on what you were saying, which I agree with a lot of what you were saying, is that we have a little bit of a debate going on in our profession right now. And if I can just sort of characterize it, there's two different camps about AI. One camp is that the AI is so ubiquitous that it's going to necessitate that architects become hyper specialized.
Mm.
That and because the AI is going to be able to do all of that sort of design permutations and et cetera. It's basically the AI is a creator, and so architects have to become more fluent as effectively technologists. Um, that's one argument. There's a counter argument, which is just the opposite, which is that actually AI is really good at doing all the sort of dirty fingernail stuff, and getting really into the weeds at doing technically a sort of a technical competency, and that it actually the architects are going to succeed are the generalists, the people who can synthesize all that information and do that. Obviously, if you know me, I'm of the latter camp. I'm not of the former one. Only because it matches identically my own career. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be a design architect and an owner of one kind or another since in my early 30s. And so I've had the fortune of leading teams of experts and directing them. And so I end up having to synthesize a lot of information in order to be able to do that. So, highly technical people like structural engineers or mechanical engineers, for example, just to name a few. But increasingly, we're seeing more and more expertise. But AI is actually very, very good at being able to generate a number of different rather technical scenarios quite quickly and transform those into documents that you could use to build what those are. But again, my problem here is that I'm basing that on 40 years of experience doing that. I worry about younger architects not having that background that allows you to discern, what AI is what if it's garbage that it's and its output, or is it something that's actually useful? And how do you develop that ability to sort of cultivate and curate the information in a way that's meaningful?
I think you bring up something that is probably one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces. We are heading into a world where hyper specialization is, generally speaking, what has the most value. And the challenge there is you become so specialized in something, and then technology shifts, and a lot of that skill set can become obsolete, right? Another piece that I see as a challenge in this sort of situation, it feels like I watched a shift happen, just being the daughter of an architect, because my father learned to draft purely with pencil and paper and blueprints. And let's just put it this way, we're coming up on Christmas here. I always knew that Santa was dad from a very early age because the handwriting. You learn to write in a very specific way. And I don't feel like today's generation of coming architects has that same level of focus on the actual drafting skills, formation of letters, things like that, because you were expected to be able to make all blueprints very uniform and able to last the test of time, all with pencil, essentially. So that's changed. I watched him hire people to take care of putting all of his hand designs into CAD because he just couldn't be bothered. He'd prefer to draft traditionally the way he learned to. And in part, it was an art form. It really, truly held that for him. Like even drawing the trees and the landscape into the flat drawings, into the plots, and then pass it over to somebody who would put it all in CAD, right? So that's one change that happened. And now we're going to see yet another and another and another that come at an accelerating rate because technology is moving so fast. And I think everything in engineering is affected by this. So it was right to bring it up.
It just reminds me so much of how much today I still love drawing. And if you have an architect, certainly of a certain generation, where like myself, I learned not on a computer, but it was a real apprenticeship, was doing all those things that you're talking about. Just learning how to hold a pencil, for example, and how to draft with a pencil, and understand what different leads were, and the particular tools and apparatus that had been, had been the sort of same tools that architects had used for centuries. All of a sudden, rapidly being transferred to mouse clicks, and now being something else entirely, just talking to an agentic AI, or algorithmic AI, and just going through different permutations, and that that's a wholly different type of skill set. But I still think that the architects still communicate mainly by drawing. If you're talking to other architects or you're talking to your engineers, a lot of times when you're talking to your client, I still advocate to my team and the people I work with, I want to see your drawings, I want to see your sketches as much as I want to see your renderings or your CAD drawings or what have you.
Yeah. Now, I want to get into the luxury paradox. Let's talk about the creation of zero carbon eco resorts. Luxury travel and sustainability can sound like contradictions. How do you reconcile the footprint of high-end development with the principles of ecological stewardship?
Well, actually, luxury is that right now. For many, and one of the things that I have a lot of hope for is that a lot of that sort of development is happening in the hospitality industry. And I come at it from a point of view of just economics, and my own experience. I've designed projects like this before, and also I have a sense that, unfortunately, we don't live in an equitable universe. I wish we did, and hopefully one day we'll get there. But in the meantime, we have the decision makers tend to be people who have the means to experience something like what I'm proposing, which is unlike anything that anybody's ever seen, because we forefront not just a complete immersion in nature, but we also are forefronting technology itself. So, when you get to the edge of the world, guess what you have to do? You have to bring your own power. You have to bring your own energy. You have to bring, in some cases, you have to bring your own water and everything else. So you have to figure out how to do all that. And I think just that experience of having to build something like this and solve all of those problems, and then do it in a way which you're not trying to, it's not you're leading with a bleeding heart as much as you're presenting the world in a way that is attractive to people and comfortable and safe, and ultimately very social. I think that's the other part of it that we're focused on. But I can't, as an architect, do anything more than frame a problem and do it in such a way that people can bring their own experiences and own sensibility to it, and provoke, hopefully, something that is awe-inspiring, and for many people would maybe even be the first time they've really encountered nature in a kind of raw form, and that's something that we're focused on.
Some critics might just simply say that eco-luxury just caters to the privileged few. So how do you see projects like yours serving as models for ones that can potentially be more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that you have to do anything now, today, any kind of building, with a sensitivity to the environment that you're putting it in. So we start with that. So there's just are you adding to the environment? Are you taking it away? And then you expand that inevitably to people. Is this something that's going to benefit the community? Is it something that's essentially meant to exclude? Are we honoring the sort of traditions of the community itself, the history of the place, both ecologically and humanistically? And so, I think we tackle some difficult issues just by proposing what we're doing. And I like to think that we're being sensitive to all of that. I'm not doing this just because I need another notch on my belt. I'm doing this because I believe that this is the way to make a difference.
Are there specific metrics or standards that you lean on to ensure that resorts are truly regenerative, not just beautiful and efficient, but net contributors to the ecosystem that they inhabit?
Well, I think the obvious metrics are from an emissions point of view, it's how do we succeed in that? But I also believe that we bring to this a whole ecosystem of how we design with nature, not against nature, how we design with a community in mind, how we organize and are sensitive to the building of this in such a way that we do as little to damage the environment as possible, and ideally give back both to that particular environment and the community itself. You never know until you do it. I'm sure there's going to be a host of problems along the way, and and each site is going to have something unique about it. But we're trying to do this in a way where we're essentially creating a single model that can be adapted to almost any environment. And there's ways in which it kind of transforms into the particular specifics of that environment. Where the slope is, or if it's in the forest or desert or an island, for example. But we're not as focused on trying to. I mean, the typical eco resort looks a little bit like you have these little tiny huts that are luxurious, and they kind of are almost like a string of pearls that are sort of cascading through the landscape, and it's not anything like that. It's really grounded more on pulling people together, giving them a place to congregate socially, and then essentially to create as small a footprint as possible in that, and everything barely touches the ground. It's all very light footprint.
I'd love for you to give your view and use of adaptive reuse and cultural continuity. I know that you've transformed iconic spaces, as I mentioned in the intro, like the Rodin Museum and Macy's Herald Square. How do you consider adaptive reuse as helping us bridge with innovation? How do you use it even to honor past while preparing cities for change?
Yeah. I think that when I think of nature, I include the sort of fabric of cities as well. The
environment you're working within, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think of New York as a kind of wilderness that has
it's a jungle of sorts. Yes,
that has a very dense and rich history. And is if our view of life were just a little bit different, I think we would notice how rapidly our cities are changing all the time. I mean, you get to a certain point in your life and you realize that things that you thought were there are no longer there, and but we all sort of have to build a kind of city of the imagination. Because at some point the city exhausts our ability to know everything about the city itself. We have to imagine the city beyond just our immediate surrounding. That's one of the things I like about the cities, is that naturalistic quality to them. They have cliffs and ravines and outlooks, and and all you have to do is just kind of change your perspective a little bit to see that. And so within that fabric are incredible buildings that maybe most people would just completely not even look at, but they just happen to be there, and maybe they're not used as in the right way anymore, or their original use no longer has the same meaning, or is not as economically viable. And so I think we have a responsibility as stewards of that environment to ask ourselves profound questions, and starting with, is it better to tear something down, or can we repurpose this, and does that have a greater value in doing that? And it's often more expensive to repurpose existing buildings than it is to, simply demolish it and build something shiny and new. But I mean,
I had this experience myself this summer because we were replacing our entire deck for our lower house, and we're built into we're built into a hillside, so we have a lot of decks, right? We have
Yeah.
our upper deck, and then we have the lower deck. It sweeps across the entire building, and then stairs down to our terraced yard below.
Right.
And so it's a lot of,
Sounds great.
outdoor space. It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
But we learned that, well, it was time to replace it, right? This is a simple just demonstration for people. It was time to replace it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, the struts look good. Everything that's holding the deck up looks good. Let's just keep that as it is. And we're just going to replace everything that's skinning the top. Well, as it would turn out, it had actually started to pitch downhill a bit. And the crew didn't measure that before they began the project. So then they had to essentially jack up, introduce new, I forget what you call pilings, right? To make sure that everything was completely flat, completely as it should be for a deck, and then do the work. It added man hours. It would have been much simpler to just tear it all off and replace it all.
Yes.
And in the end, because this particular builder felt they had made the mistake, they absorbed the cost difference.
That's good.
And it probably would have been a few $1,000s extra we're talking a $75,000 project.
Yeah.
What might have been 80 grand, right?
Yeah.
But it was still extra work, extra man hours, and kind of a pain.
Yeah.
But I was proud to reuse materials that weren't bad, like I wanted to keep that kind of ecological perspective in doing it. And I think the same is true when you talk about old buildings, because sometimes even the way they're constructed was for different spatial use.
Yeah.
Like they might not have had an open floor plan. So therefore they had structural components in what would have been the center of the new room, because you're, what do? You have a load-bearing wall that you need to support. Now, how are you going to manage this?
Right.
It's easier to just tear it down in some ways, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing. We have to start to really advocate. And I think this is something also AI can help us with, is that, to catalog and really understand the value of our built environment is itself a huge proposition. I mean, we kind of rely on antiquated city documents and, building permits and things like that to do that. But increasingly, I think we have the means to understand and, as if our city was itself a vast collection that's in a museum somewhere. If we took the same kind of archival kind of preoccupation and applied it to our cities, I think it would foster a whole new level of understanding of the history behind our built environment, and I because so much of that tends to get buried in demolition and rebuilding, and we see a great example of this right now in Washington, of history being demolished in a sort of nonsensical manner. And
well, I'm glad that you brought this up, because I struggle with how to talk about these sorts of things, but I think in part because I grew up the daughter of an architect.
Yeah.
I always went with my father to spaces, and he'd be talking about like, wow, look at the facing of this building. Do you know how many hours went into the carving of these sculptures that line this wall? Some of the oldest buildings in San Francisco are just so beautiful. And
San Francisco in particular, there's some really great older buildings there.
Same is true of New York, like just, you walk the streets there and there's so much history, and it gives vibrancy and culture to the space.
Yeah.
Now, I have a good example of a town that rebuilt very poorly after World War II. I visited this town in France called Brest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in one of my favorite regions of France, which is like the northwestern region, kind of along the seaboard.
Mm-hmm.
And this town in particular had just been completely demolished in World War II. And they rebuilt it with just cement and not a lot of extra care.
Yeah.
And yet you can go north to Saint Malo and see a town where they rebuilt brick by brick
Yeah.
with the same material and tried to recreate the castles that had been there and the town that had been there.
Mm-hmm.
It, of course, takes so much more effort and time to do something like that.
Yeah.
But the entire feeling of the city is one where people want to spend time and it's more joyful.
Yeah.
And you go to Brest and it's like, wow, people here seem really depressed. And it's just, all you're looking at is cement, you know, the stone architecture, the design. I mean, square buildings versus something else.
Yeah.
It just gives a different feel. It gives a different culture.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that we now are looking at, in New York in particular, converting older office buildings, and I mean older, I mean we're talking 1970s, 1980s office buildings that are what we call Class B office buildings, and trying to convert those into residential, buildings. And it's not without its challenges, but I think that's all part of it. Just like that era, which we think of as modern, is no longer modern anymore. I mean, it's already history. I grew up in just out south of Los Angeles. Our home at the time was, I think, like 25 years old. That was old, for LA. To have a 25-year-old house. Of course, in New York, it's nothing. But it's the fact is that people have to think. It helps to think of cities as continually evolving and continually changing. And so at some point, you do want some parts of that to sort of slow down. Some of us do, and so you don't lose everything, in this kind of ever-changing milieu of building and demolishing and rebuilding. So there's a lot to be said for repurposing older buildings, and again, not just because they themselves might have some historic value. I mean, that's part of it. But I think it's more just, it's just for continuity. And frankly, also, there's an incredible argument, a sustainable argument, why destroying buildings actually releases a lot of bad environmental gases into the world, and that we don't need anymore. It's sort of all this embodied carbon that exists in a lot of buildings, particularly older concrete buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a big movement, to readapt a lot of those concrete buildings that you were talking about, and try to turn them into something, a little bit more livable, let's say, than some people think they are.
Yeah, introduce some beauty, And so much of that can be done with refacing something with brick or stone, adding elements. Like even the framing of windows can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I think that's those are incredible insights, and all that says a lot about who we are. And I think that is it gets lost sometimes in the sort of constant bombardment of sort of imagery and text and everything that we see through our screens. But when you actually go and experience a place, even if you're not completely aware of it, it all kind of seeps through. And it's not just the visual part of it; it's the just general sense that you might get. That is, the way I describe it to people is that if you've gone someplace and for whatever reason you walked into a space and it took your breath away, well, then you're experiencing architecture. That's it right there. It ultimately is a profoundly emotional experience more than anything.
There's a really great example in my neighborhood. I live in Scotts Valley, and there is this former college called Bethany College that just it started to become defunct, and a group bought the property, which included several homes and that were faculty housing and things along those lines, quite a bit of land, and also, of course, the college itself. And they created 1440 Multiversity. They retooled several of the buildings. There were several that also had to be torn down. But in the end, they were able to accomplish a similar look and feel through even introducing elements of copper, beams on the outside of buildings, and things like that to bring the entire look and feel together, which really looks like like a ski resort village and some, Colorado mountainscape or something like that, perhaps Tahoe. And it really brings the environment to a space where people really enjoy spending time. They host all sorts of retreats there with big names and small names and company affiliated groups and things like that. And it's really beautiful. I was skeptical at first, as a part of the community, I was able to weigh in on design and things like that. I'm like, this all looks beautiful. Will it actually be executed? Because sometimes that is the challenge too. It takes more money in some cases, as you've said too, to do some of these things.
It does, yeah. And unfortunately, it's still expensive, and I think that. But I think where you put your money says again a lot about you as your legacy, your values, and so it doesn't always necessarily affect directly the bottom line. But what I've always advocated to my clients is that it's hard to measure value, simply by pure economics of the day. Ultimately, and as somebody who develops real estate, and I talk to a lot of people who are, thinking about investing in real estate. I tell them, look, if it's not a place you want to be, it's not a place you want to live or work or play or what have you, or heal, then don't do it. Just don't do it. If it's not something that you yourself could see yourself in that environment, don't do it. It's a long, costly process. But ultimately, I think the returns, once you frame it that way, are incalculable.
Now, I want to talk to you for a moment about urban design and the climate paradox. We know that cities account for over 70% of global emissions, yet per capita, they produce less pollution per person, right, per capita, than people in rural areas. And cities are also a hotbed for innovation and design and things along these lines. How can architects and planners really leverage that paradox to create cities that are both sustainable and deeply human?
Well, part of it is the subject that we covered earlier is examine our built environment in a different way. And again, not preservation for the sake of preservation, but examine each and every aspect of the city in terms of its value, both economically, but historically and culturally, and environmentally. So we have now all kinds of tools to do that, and I do think this is where AI really can help us a lot. But we have to put that mechanism in place. It's not there right now. You have it in pieces. Advocacy is all over the place. It's kind of bubbles up every now and then when you get real hotbed items. But we just don't think of it that way. And I'm very wary of comparing our culture to other cultures. Just because I spent too much of my life going around the world and designing things, and I was always very sensitive about the cultures that I was doing this in. But yeah, we have to start to put into place a kind of sense of, I don't know, civic pride, almost, that helps people, first of all, understand the built environment. I think we really fall down in just really helping people understand that. The big differentiator I find is travel. People who have the ability and the means to travel and do so with an open mind. Not everybody does that, but at least does so with a bit of an open mind. You're really understanding a little bit of what is at heart, what we really value. Because when people travel, what do? I mean, you really basically do two things. You go someplace and you eat food, and you experience in the life of a particular study, but you also tend to look at buildings, it's of some kind or another. That's what's on your itinerary or your tour, or landscape. You're essentially looking at, and those are all manifestations of another culture that you decided that you were going to experience on whatever level that means. That to me is where you can start to really get to a point where people can make their own connections and start to understand a little bit about, when I go travel, this is what I do. Oh yeah, and if I could just think of myself as a tourist in my own community, in my own neighborhood, what would I experience, or what would I want people to see about my community that means something to me? It's kind of trying to flip that perspective, so that people start to use that as a means of self-reflection, or about their community and what they can do to help make it better.
Yeah, I think it's also almost the intangibles. Like, how do you feel when you walk into a space, right? How does it make you feel? Yeah. Now, I wonder if there are particular ways in which climate change is affecting your design that you think really stand out, or if you could make a comment about resilience, risk, and innovation insofar as your work is concerned.
Well, it's all those things. My work is always about taking risks. I think I try to keep that ever present. I don't like to ever repeat myself, and nor should we. I mean, I look at every project that I undertake as starting with a blank sheet of paper, and my goal is to understand my clients' desires, and give some kind of a vision to what they are. Right. That's fundamentally our role. However, we also have to start to thinking of ourselves in terms of our citizenship and what that means, and because architects are kind of unique in that, if I'm a painter and I paint whatever, and you don't like it, well, you get to just walk away from it. You don't have to really. But if I build a building, and let's say I build your school, and you don't like it, or it doesn't make you feel comfortable, or it makes you feel excluded, or anything that might be of negative consequence, there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, except move. But for the most part, we can't escape that. So we do have, all of us have a responsibility, I think, to we are, to essentially model ourselves in a way that is exemplary. Uh, and um, it sounds like your father was that, type of individual where, really lived his convictions. And a lot of architects are like that. And sometimes annoyingly so. Um, but, I do think a lot of people do get into architecture because they want to do something good, and not because they just want to sort of desecrate our wasteland of of bad architecture. So we don't need any more bad architecture, but we do. And I don't mean that in just aesthetic way. I mean architecture, out conviction, architecture that doesn't, put people first, and the kind of like I don't know if you saw the Brutalist, the movie, but I hated that movie. I hated it, because it was everything that to me was a cliche about what an architect is, and none of it is.
Which movie was this? Because I don't think I've heard it.
The Brutalist. It was out maybe about a year ago. It was a candidate for the best picture.
I have young boys at home. I haven't had time for a film in a while.
Anyway, but it was, it was sort of modeled on the Fountainhead. So it was the same kind of stereotype about architects as sort of loners, and it's my way or the highway. And if I don't like my building or you don't like it, I'll blow it up, or whatever.
That's a trope, I guess.
Yeah. And
that wasn't my father either, so I think it would annoy him.
Yeah, and most of us, a lot of people get into architecture because it's a social experience. It's you work in a studio and you're surrounded by your friends and you're working on projects together, or in competition or what have you. But it's not. We're not sort of lone wolf artists starving for our conviction. I think a lot of it's rooted in doing something good for society.
Yeah, something productive.
Yeah.
This gets to my question for you about education and leadership. As a longtime educator at Yale and Columbia, what do you believe the next generation of architects must learn, not just technically, but ethically, in order to succeed in this new era of sustainable design?
First of all, what's very promising is how many younger architects get involved in architecture primarily because they're very concerned about the environment. It's I would say easily the top subject for younger architects. And was barely a subject when I was studying architecture. So that's changed a lot. And so, I think the problem is that they run the risk of becoming disenchanted because architecture has a real problem. We have a real problem, architects, of explaining our value in a culture that doesn't really understand what architects do. And that's a difficult thing to communicate.
They see it as expensive, right?
They see it as expensive. They see it as self-indulgent. They see it as...
I've heard all these stories.
Yes.
Well, and so much of what an architect does is understand how a project gets executed and have relationships with the local county office so that you can get things approved and moving along too. My father is retired. He turns 80 in December, so not too long off now, right? But he's still doing projects in Menlo Park and Palo Alto and Atherton because he knows people there, and primarily it's for, some executive at Google or Facebook or whatever who has bought a plot of land and is trying to build something with there's no plumbing, there's no nothing, and he's got to build it all in and make sure that it's going to pass permit inspections and be able to move along. And because of his longstanding relationships since, the early 80s when he moved to California for this line of work, he knows everybody. He knows not necessarily what palms to grease, because it's not like that. It's not corrupt, but you just go in with a smile sometimes and you can get the project done as opposed to waiting for an email response.
Yes. Well, that's just how human beings operate.
Yeah, right.
I think that's effective social management. Yeah, I think that's, to me, the subject that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation, which was this kind of trend towards hyper-specialization, has been a real problem. It's been a shortcut for some architects to succeed in a very narrow way, but it comes at a great cost because we lose what I think the thing that we're very best at, which is that you cannot be an architect and not be an optimist about the future. It's impossible.
You're building something that you want to last for 100 years, right?
Something that is ideally you want it to last for 100 years, but even just the time it takes to build anything, anywhere, means that it's somewhere in the future. It's not a near future kind of endeavor. It's always, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. Usually, in all of my projects are 5 years, sometimes even 10 years in terms of planning and execution, and let alone the whole phase of people are actually occupying and living in these things and changing them. And I'm old enough now where I've had buildings. Actually, the latest casualty is Bloomingdale's in San Francisco, which I designed early in my career. It's now part of. Actually, they ended up selling the whole thing. It was a flagship store in San Francisco. Nobody knows what to do with this, right? It's this, and
is that at Union Square?
That's the Macy's in Union Square. Which I think what's interesting about that is that Macy's got rid of it. Then a company came back and said, well, we can do something with it. And so Macy's now rethinking their position. And I think it's going to be developed with somehow Macy's involvement. So that's interesting. And Macy's is the parent company of Bloomingdale's. Now this was on, it's called Market something. And it was part of a big shopping center. The name has changed a bunch of times, but it was originally Westfield. Bloomingdale's there was a part of that. It was an anchor tenant to the whole shopping center. The whole shopping center is barely functioning right now. Nordstrom's was there. They've left, and Bloomingdale's left, and so.
So much shopping is now online. It's killed a lot of retail.
Yeah, it is. But what's interesting is that it's actually started to shift as well, where you see a lot of what people had written off as older shopping centers now sort of slowly coming back to life. And you see, it's particularly in Asia, where I think they do it in a much better way because they tend to locate all of their shopping centers near public transportation. And that's a huge generator for foot traffic. So we don't do that. We based it on the car, which is a huge, obviously, mistake for many reasons. So.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask you one last question, specifically just from a reflective perspective. Looking back, which project or moment do you think most reshaped your understanding of architecture's role in the world?
Oh, that's an easy That's an easy one. It was the temporary viewing platform at Ground Zero.
Where is this again?
It was the temporary viewing platform at Ground Zero. Right, this is right
Oh,
after 9/11.
yeah.
And what was interesting about that is my wife and I had gone down. We lived a few blocks away from Ground Zero, where the World Trade Center is, and we saw the towers come down firsthand. And we went down there about, I think it was about a week after, we just walked to the site just to see whatever we could see. And it was pure bedlam. I mean, it was people literally crawling up,
The rubble.
fences and craning to see anything that was going on. It was all sort of boarded up. But, besides this sea of humanity, which was nothing like anything I'd ever seen in my life, were people hawking souvenirs, the World Trade Center, it's all this sort of standard New York stuff. And it was just such a strange juxtaposition. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. On the one hand, I understood that people had and needed to get some perspective on this that they couldn't get, by looking at their television screen. But there had to be a more dignified way to do that. And so, we were fortunate enough that at the time we were able to get direct contact with the administration at the mayor's office and essentially build this thing adjacent to this one little part of the World Trade Center, adjacent to it, St. Paul's Chapel, where not only was that a sort of haven for all the workers that were working and the first responders at the site, but it was also a cemetery in the back that, and incredibly, there wasn't any debris that hit this particular spot. And it was the cemetery itself had these 400-foot tall elm trees, and so it was an incredibly peaceful place. And so, and we built this platform out of plywood and scaffolding. So very prosaic New York stuff. And the thing that was most amazing to me is that I had no idea when I designed this what the effect was going to be. But when you elevated it up to, we had it 20 feet up in the air, and when you gently brought people up that onto this platform, again, all plywood, very, sort of nothing fancy at all, but it was completely quiet and still, and a profound experience. It's hard to describe.
I stood on that platform, so I've traveled all over the United States for work, and I was in New York on work, and it was, not too long after, within the first year, I think.
Yes.
And I was staying in Manhattan. I walked all the way down the many avenues to get to Ground Zero and saw the vendors you're talking about and the t-shirt sales. I mean, what? But at the same time, this is a moment people wanted to preserve in some way. And then walked around the space and saw all the pictures and the flowers and everything that people were leaving. Like the amount of respect and reverence that people paid in that space, I think was really incredible. Yeah. And while it was the utmost tragedy, it really did bring people together in a way that I think is and has been healing for the people of New York and elsewhere.
Yeah, it was it was one of those things where at the time, if you remember, New York had a really bad rap as a very unfriendly place to go.
I never felt that way, but at the same time, it's just, I think you take experience with you.
Yeah.
New Yorkers have a specific kind of attitude.
I don't know if it's completely deserved, but But again, I think that the bet was that, well, New Yorkers, this
Yeah, I know. But people say the same thing about French people, and I've never
Yes,
found that to be
you know.
true. So,
Well,
it is what it is.
you're definitely enlightened.
You bring culture with you. I think,
Yeah,
so much of your experience is about the attitude that you come into an experience with. And if you have an open mind and a pleasant, kind of demeanor, then the
yeah,
experience you're going to have, it will be generally positive.
yeah, I
Which is,
think so. I think so. And but again, that was the part that you mentioned, which was the most important part, is
yeah,
that it was people coming together.
yeah,
In a way that will never ever leave me. And I was one of the lucky few who was able to actually, feel like I could do something
yeah,
at
you
that
contributed.
moment that would be healing. Um, and yeah, I'm very, very proud.
Well, I think that's amazing. Thank you, Kevin, so much for joining me today. I realize you've spent over an hour here with me, so perhaps more time than we planned, but I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And I really just appreciate being invited into your world where technology and design and humanity converge to build something that's truly beyond zero.
Well, it was an absolute delight to spend this afternoon with you, Corinna. I love your insights, and your perspective, and um, I think your father must be very proud.
Thank you. Well, I'll share this episode with him on the tail end. So thank you so much for joining me today.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Kevin's work, for one, reminded me that architecture is not just about structures, but about systems of care for people, for place, and for the planet we share. It's always fun for me to reflect back on my growing up and having a father who is an architect himself, the experiences I had in cities, visiting buildings, the number of slide film on camera that I watched him take, and then would experience with him after the fact, running through slides of our vacations together. Having an appreciation for design is something I think that we all can experience and love. And just getting a glimpse behind the scenes of what it takes to build, I think, is something that many of you will have truly enjoyed. To learn more about Kevin Kennon's work, visit kdcaia.com or connect with him on LinkedIn. You can, of course, find all of these links with show notes and explore the Zero Carbon Resort Initiative at bzddc.com. As always, again, you'll find these links with show notes and at caremorebebetter.com, along with details on how to support our cause partner, Prescott College, and also to help us plant more trees, because when you subscribe to our newsletter, we are planting trees. This year, we planted 36,000 or more through our partnership with Forest Planet. Now, as we step into 2025 and beyond, I invite you to continue this exploration with me as I explore topics that range from nutrition and health to the social impact of buildings in your daily life. To support this journey together, visit caremorebebetter.com/support. And there are ways there that you can connect with the show, help us earn a little bit to keep the show going, and also to contribute to causes that we support and appreciate. Together, we can care more, we can be better, we can even create a more regenerative, resilient future as we shift the way we think about creating spaces and how we build them. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.